conversation. So, Susan and Jordan, welcome along to the programme.
Thanks.
Great to have you.
Thank you, Justin.
We'll start with you, Jordan. You're a hard man to categorise in many ways. Your work actually attracts attention from both believers and non-believers, and many of whom say that you've actually made them reconsider their views about religion, especially many atheists that I've heard on, who have said your work opens up things in a new way. Do you just tend to describe yourself as a religious man at all?
Well, I would definitely describe myself as a religious man, yeah. I think that's fundamentally true. The devil's in the details. So what does that mean exactly?
I've seen you've been asked the question, do you believe in God? And that's not a question you necessarily find it terribly easy to answer.
Well, I don't know what people mean when they say believe. Like it's as if that question explains itself when it's asked. It's like it doesn't. What do you mean by believe? And what do you mean by God? And what makes you think that the question that I'm answering is the same one that you're asking? If this is not something that you can say yes or no to in any straightforward manner. So I find it an off-putting question. And I don't think it's because I'm avoiding the issue. I think that to answer it properly requires books and lectures. So,
do you see yourself at least in the Christian tradition as far as your, I suppose, worldview?
There's no doubt about that because I'm a Westerner. There's no escape from that.
Yeah.
I'm conditioned in every cell as a consequence of the Judeo-Christian worldview. And so I've read a fair bit in other religious traditions and have a reasonable grasp on some of them, I would say, not trying to overestimate my knowledge, but we're saturated in Judeo-Christian ethics, and so...
I've seen you say that you certainly live your life as though God exists.
Yes, I would say, well, to the best of my ability, right, yeah. And I think that that's the fundamental hallmark of belief, is it's how you act, not what you say about what you think you think.
Sure.
What do you know about what you think? Seriously, I mean, we wouldn't need a psychology, an anthropology, a sociology, any of the humanities if our thoughts were transparent to ourselves. They're not in the least.
And
in the least they are. But
you've been willing to be quite critical as well of some of the new atheists, so Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins. What have you made of their particular way of approaching religion?
They just don't take it seriously enough. As far as I'm concerned, they don't contend with the real thinkers.
I know all three of them very well, and I have deep, great arguments with them, and they seem to be taking it seriously. I know what you mean. There's a certain sort of superficiality in the writings of all of them, but as people, I find they really care about these issues.
Care.
Yeah.
They care. There's no doubt about that, and it's not like I'm not sympathetic to the atheist or rationalist claim. I'm perfectly sympathetic to it, but I don't believe that the level of discussion that's characteristic of Dawkins and Dennett and Sam Harris, say, approaches the level of complexity of, say, Friedrich Nietzsche or Dostoevsky.
Well, that would be asking quite a lot, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but if you're going to play in that arena, man, you're going to play with the heavyweights.
But what I've noticed is it's a lot of people who maybe up to a point have been interested in what those people have been saying from the new atheist side, who are also interested in what you're saying. There's an interesting sort of correlation there.
Yeah, definitely.
And why is it that especially some of these, potentially, I see a lot of men in this audience are coming to you, Jordan, to sort of sit at your feet and hear what you have to say at this point?
Well, the new atheists have a hell of a time with an active ethic. They say, well, you can build an ethic on rationality. It's like, well, first of all, that's not self-evident. It's possible, but it's by no means self-evident. And their essential existential concept is rather hollow. Like with Harris, for example, when I talked to him twice on two different podcasts, and we never really got to his sense of what the ideal society might be. But I've read his writings on the maximization of well-being, for example, and that's just not going anywhere. You can't even measure it properly. And if you're thinking about something like that scientifically, that turns out to be that's not a problem. It's a catastrophic problem.
But Sam really goes deeply into the consequences of meditation, and he tells stories about his own experience of how behavior changes. Compassion seems to arise naturally. This is not based on rationality, which is not everything, and I would agree with you there. It's based on practical experience, training in observing one's own thoughts, which is also of interest to you, and in the way behavior changes in ways which he would say, and also query whether it's true, that it's better behavior.
Well,
that being compassionate and kind to people is better. We can't have some great underlying reason why. If you don't have God, it's a very, very difficult question. You've got to find some basis. But even without one, Sam is trying to say, as I would, that if you spend a lot of time meditating and really becoming to understand yourself and see the consequences of certain thoughts and actions, then better actions follow. That's one of the things I like about his work.
Well, and I'm certainly not questioning his ethical integrity or his commitment to these problems, although I certainly don't think that compassion or kindness constitutes a sufficient grounds for a transcendent ethic. Not in the least. Partly because both, and I can speak about that technically to some degree. Compassion is associated with trait agreeableness fundamentally, and agreeableness is a great short-term strategy for infants. But it's a very bad medium to long-term strategy for adults, and it's by no means the ground upon which an entire complex society can rest. And that's partly what you see playing out right now in the political world, because the politically correct types are very high in compassion. We have research that demonstrates that. But that ethic doesn't work for a sophisticated society.
We were only doing introductions. We're already well into the...
It's my fault. I started. I interrupted.
But let's come to you, Sue. You may be familiar